Crosscode contains the most compelling silent protagonist in any game I've ever played. This combined with dungeons filled to the brim with excellent puzzles and compelling secret-filled exploration makes for a fantastic experience. In my opinion, it's a tragedy how few people have played this game. Every single person I've talked to about this game has nearly nothing but good things to say about it, and while it didn't sell horribly, I do feel that many people that haven't even heard of Crosscode would love this game if they gave it a chance. With that said, I'll be spoiling the entire game and its DLC in this review, so if you haven't already played the game, go play it and come back. Crosscode takes place in the future within Crossworlds, a fake MMO, developed by Instatainment. Interestingly, Crosscode is a physical place on a distant moon that players interact with by taking control of avatars that are on the moon, as opposed to a digital MMO. Crosscode begins with an introductory section played as Shizuka. She argues with a silhouetted figure that talks to her virtually. The silhouetted figure is pleading with her to stop what she is doing, but she refuses. You fight some enemies and are given a tutorial on your basic combat abilities, as well as shown a cool fire blast you won't have access to when you begin the regular game. Before long, you reach a building and head inside. There you will meet Satoshi, Shizuka's brother. This conversation will give you some questions about what is going on right away, as you won't understand what Shizuka and Satoshi are really talking about till much later on. Satoshi is dying, but he is trying to finish some important work before he dies. Satoshi finishes what he was working on and collapses on the floor. A breathtaking opening cutscene plays before you wake up as Leah. Leah begins her adventure aboard the MS Solar, a maintenance ship of Crossworlds, and is quickly introduced to her basic combat abilities, which includes a ranged attack, which can be charged to do more damage and bounce off walls, or fired rapidly. She also has a melee combo attack, a short dash, which can be used 3 times before it needs to be recharged, and a block/parry. Each of these abilities can be modified with combat arts, which when used consume SP, which is this game's mana system. You can hold down the combat art button to consume more SP and do a higher tier combat art as long as you've unlocked that combat art. Combat arts are unlocked via the circuit tree. As you progress throughout the game, you will unlock different elemental attacks, which can be switched to at will. Each element has its own circuitry and combat arts. The circuitry functions wonderfully. Alongside basic stat upgrades, there are choices on which combat art you want to unlock for each ability. For example, in the ice tree, you can choose between a simple barrage of icicles or throwing a shot that when hit will cage enemies in a circle of icicles. Some portions of the skill tree are locked until you obtain a key needed to continue exploring Crossworlds. So as you unlock more areas of the game, you unlock more of the skill tree, which provides a reward within the skill tree for progressing through the main story. The controls feel intuitive and crisp, especially the dash. Being able to dash 3 times in quick succession feels amazing, and timing them perfectly to maximize your speed is a fun alternative to walking outside of combat. Dashing is also your most powerful defensive tool while in combat, so learning to fully utilize it is very rewarding. Most players will notice right away the similarities in appearance between Leah and Shizuka. During my first playthrough, I assumed they were sisters, and it turns out I wasn't too far off. Upon waking up, Leah is introduced to Sergei. Sergei functions as this game's companion character, and thankfully he stays out of the way for the most part, except when he's needed in the story. Sergei informs Leah that her speech module has malfunctioned, meaning she cannot speak. As the game progresses, Sergei adds a limited number of specific words to Leah's vocabulary so she can communicate more effectively. This limitation is used to the fullest as Leah learns to say these words in different ways and in different contexts to communicate what she wants with those around her. For example, when Leah says bye to Sergei, it means she wants to log out for the day, but the best way this limitation is used is through Leah's non-verbal communication. She has a huge range of emotions she is capable of showing, so the player can easily deduce how she feels and what she is thinking. This makes Leah feel far from a blank slate character that the player can project themselves onto, instead her only fully fleshed out character with her own desires, anxieties, and quirks. Leah is informed that she has amnesia very early on, and the goal of playing Crossworlds is to recover her memories. Leah also has an encounter with a strange blue avatar who seems to know more about Leah than she herself does. He attempts to abduct Leah and forces Leah into her first boss fight. After the fight, with the help of Sergei, she escapes to begin the official tutorial of Crossworlds. During the tutorial, you meet another major character, Emily. She will challenge you to race through the next section of the tutorial and run off. In fact, Emily will race Leah through every dungeon in the game, and it really is a race, it's not a scripted win or loss. It feels fantastic when you do go fast enough to win, and Leah even has some very smug facial expressions she shows when she wins. This tutorial primarily focuses on getting you acquainted with some of the basic puzzle components you will encounter throughout the game. Primarily, triangular blocks that will bounce your charged shot in a particular direction. These triangular blocks allow for the best puzzles in the game and will be a part of every dungeon in the game. During the tutorial, Leah also meets Apollo and his friend Yorn. Apollo becomes Leah's friendly rival. He shares the class of Spheromancer with Leah and will later challenge Leah to duels. These duels are fairly challenging and can show the potential of many moves available to you when used in specific ways. On more than one occasion while fighting him, I saw a move I hadn't used or unlocked before and found it in the circuitry after the fight so I could begin using it. These duels do a great job of showcasing the depth of Crosscode's combat and give a reason to improve it, as these duels are very difficult, and if you lose, the story will continue, so you only have one chance to beat Apollo at a time unless you are a save scammer. After completing the tutorial, you gain access to Rookie Harbor, a small town where you can properly begin your journey into Crossworlds. From this point onward, you will go through a cycle of exploring a new area, finding the next town, picking up side quests at the new town, and re-exploring the area prior to the town for secrets and to complete the side quests. Then you can enter the dungeon of that city. The dungeons consist primarily of puzzles, with some combat rooms to mix up the pace here and there. After completing a solid portion of each dungeon, a new elemental type is unlocked. Fire in the first dungeon, ice in the second, shock and wave in the third and fourth, depending on what order you choose to tackle the final dungeons. The elements are introduced brilliantly. You will already have experience using that element when you obtain it, as you use a more limited form of the element of that dungeon via orbs on the ground that, when shot through, make your bullet into an elemental bullet of that type. This makes it so when the element is obtained by players, they already know its implications in puzzles. Speaking of puzzles, puzzle mechanics are introduced masterfully, one at a time, then built on in a series of puzzles before they are interwoven with already integrated components, allowing for some very engaging and difficult puzzles. It frustrates me to no end when games introduce interesting mechanics but don't meaningfully explore those mechanics, and I am very happy to say that Crosscode is not among those games. Upon obtaining the first element, you're introduced to the Elemental Overload system. When you are attacking using any element, you'll build up Elemental Overload. Upon reaching the limit, you'll be locked out of using elemental attacks for some time. However, by attacking in neutral mode, you will lower Elemental Overload. This rewards players for staying aggressive by earning the ability to use more of their elemental attacks, which are generally more powerful. This system also prevents players from using only the attacks an enemy is weakest to. For enemies that basically only take damage to one elemental attack, this system still works. Once you get close to overloading, you switch to neutral attacks, and in doing so lower elemental overload. This means you are still progressing towards killing the enemy despite doing next to zero damage. Another staple of combat is enemy breaks. By hitting enemies when they are vulnerable, indicated by them glowing red, they'll be broken. However, they cannot be broken by just any attack. Some are broken by a charged shot, and some are melee attacks. Some enemies have unique conditions for them to be broken, like these bulls. They will charge at you, and if they run into a wall, they'll be broken. Many enemies have a different form of breaking altogether, a yellow bar that builds up under them when they are hit, by the element they are weak to. All these mechanics help enemies to feel distinct from one another and give a small minigame for you to accomplish for each enemy to make fighting them easier. Side quests in Crosscode are pretty good. While there are plenty of boring fetch quests and simple kill X number of enemy quests, there are also some super high quality quests mixed in. There are also quite a few quests that have their own unique bosses at the end of them, which is frankly insane. There are also several quests which are quite hilarious. For example, in one quest, goats were under somebody's control and their leader, the Goat Father, who was wearing a tuxedo, kicked their master down a pit. Afterwards, you gain the ability to understand him speak and hear some funny dialogue. Or in another, parrots were wearing top hats and holding guns in their talons, and they had taken hostages in a building, and I had to rescue the hostages without letting them get harmed. Side quests are the primary method of gaining experience in Crosscode. Crosscode also makes it so every level only takes 1000 experience to level up. To compensate for this, though, it scales down how much XP you get from enemies and quests if you are over the recommended level. This makes it convenient to look at a quest and immediately be able to translate how much of a level the quest will reward you. During regular gameplay, you can have 2 party members with you, which will help you fight and give you bits of dialogue about their lives outside of Crossworlds or the area you are exploring. This system works very well to make your friends feel useful, as they are genuinely very competent in combat encounters. You can even customize how you want them to tackle fights, like setting them to use more combat arts, or whether to focus the enemy you're attacking or the ones you're not. These sections also elevate the amount you as a player care about these characters, along with Leah. One small thing that help these characters to feel more believable is they are not always available. Sometimes you'll want to party with someone, and they are offline living their life. And after making a certain amount of progress in the main quest, they will get tired and need to log out. This also prompts Leah to want to log out with them, and while logged out, Leah experiences dreams that contain memories of her past. These dreams can sometimes incorporate lines of dialogue from that day, blurring the lines of what is Leah's imagination and what is a memory. While exploring, there are many hard-to-find pathways that lead to countless secret items. This primarily takes place in the form of needing to find a place to jump up to a higher elevation, and then doing platforming from there to get to the secret. Sometimes the place to jump up to is screens away from the secret. Mostly this is great, as it makes the secrets difficult to get to. However, sometimes I found it to be tedious to have to scour many screens looking for the one ledge to jump up onto so I could get to that item, which often wasn't even worth my time. I think it's possible there are too many secrets for the game's own good, because some secrets reward you with gear that is better than anything else you have access to at the time, which feels very rewarding. But other times you get a few consumables that you probably won't ever use. Thankfully, 99% of the enemies in the game don't attack you unless you attack first, which makes exploring for these secrets much nicer than it would be otherwise. There's one other reward of exploration that I have yet to mention. Scattered throughout most areas of the game are breakable plants that drop items, and often by reaching higher levels of elevation to reach secrets, you can shoot those rare plants to get better items. The simple act of breaking plants is super satisfying simply because of the sound of breaking them. Alongside normal shops which sell basic gear and consumables scattered across Crossworlds are traders. These traders provide better gear and consumables than what is available at shops, but they often require rare plants and drops from enemies to buy. The gear from shops typically has comparable stats to the ones from traders, but trader gear gives various bonuses to things like health regen or charged shot damage. In theory, I like this system, as it rewards engaging with all the systems in Crossworlds. In practice, however, it doesn't feel so great. This is largely due to the number of items required to trade for even a single piece of gear. The other main problem with the system is that each area of the game uses its own items to trade, so any extra items you collect in the previous area are useless for getting new gear. After the first dungeon, Leah joins the First Scholars Guild along with Emily. This expands Leah's friend group quite a lot, and while most of the guild members are not incredibly deep characters, I still became invested in them, especially Lucas. During exploration of Maroon Valley, after joining the guild, Emily opens up about her school life to Leah. This obviously prompts Leah to wonder more about her own life and why she has only been experiencing Crossworlds for the past few days. She manages to communicate this frustration to Sergei, and he informs Leah that this is because she is in a coma, and that he hopes that by recovering her memory in Crossworld, Leah will awaken from her coma. It turns out all of this is a lie, but Leah will not find that out for quite a while. In the meantime, this explanation mostly satisfies her and gives her more determination in continuing to progress through Crossworlds. The next day, Leah meets Citron, another member of the First Scholars Guild, for the first time. He will go on to become good friends with Leah and Emily, more so than the other members of the guild. Citron also joins Leah and Emily for most of their dungeon races going forward. One thing I haven't mentioned about the combat up until this point is how healing and consumables work. During combat, you can open a menu at any time, and use items that restore a flat amount of health after a short animation, or a consumable that gives you some kind of buff. If you are hit during the animation, it is cancelled. This makes it so that in most cases you need to run away from a fight before healing. After using an item, there's a 10-second cooldown before you can use another one. For most fights in the game, this system is a non-issue because the fights are short, and you will rarely need to use healing or buffs to get through the encounters. However, during boss fights, it feels very necessary to use healings as the fights are very long and often do a lot of damage. I often dislike having to interrupt a fight to go to a menu to heal. And not only do you need to go into the menu, but you also need to run away before healing. This really takes me out of the flow of combat. I would much rather have a system that allows me to heal while fighting. Maybe upon breaking an enemy, you get some healing. Or maybe something like if you hit a certain number of attacks in a row without being hit, you get healed. I don't know if these exact solutions would work well, but the game would benefit from some kind of system where if you play well enough, you can get healing to allow you to make more mistakes again. After completing the second dungeon, Emily finally notices that Leah has a speech model issue and can only communicate with a few words. This is honestly ridiculous. All of the members of the First Scholars Guild have already realized this about Leah, and they have spent far less time with her. Even if you believe that Emily is so self-absorbed of a person that she doesn't notice that Leah never talks, this isn't believable. They have spent several days together at this point, and she didn't notice that Leah hadn't responded to anything she said with any substance, or told her anything about herself at all. It's a shame because Emily is a good character, but this makes it feel as though she doesn't particularly care for Leah. It does not seem like this was intentionally done by the game developers. It seems as though they thought it would be a funny moment, so they did it without regard to the consequences of Emily's character. Anyway, during a raid with her guild, something goes wrong with a teleport, and Leah ends up being kidnapped by the same man who attempted to abduct her on the MS Solar. They duel for a while before Sergei attempts to help her escape. The blue avatar stops the attempt and then makes it so if he hits her again, she'll be captured. After being captured, he takes her to an unofficial area of the game called Vermilion Wasteland. She finds Lucas was also taken here, and not only that, he is unable to log out of the game. They are forced to complete some quests here over the course of several days, and both Leah and Lucas grow closer and lean on each other for support during this scary time. In between those quests, they are forced to return to their rooms for the night as they cannot log out. One morning, before leaving her room, a break-in occurs and Leah is confronted by Shizuka. Shizuka tells Leah that everything Sergei told her was a lie. She is not in a coma, she is an Evotar, a digital copy of another player, specifically Shizuka herself. Shizuka is pissed and beats Leah up and verbally berates her for existing before leaving. Leah is understandably immensely shocked and experiences flashbacks confirming what Shizuka said. Sergei tries to convince her that he was telling the truth, but Leah yells at him to leave until he finally does. Leah continues doing the quests with Lucas, and it is very noticeable to both the player and Lucas that Leah is being very silent, even for her. In fact, it is as though the game has gone quiet. There is no music during this period. There is also such a stark contrast between Leah's normal facial expressions and her facial expressions now. They are all blank and sad, and as though she feels empty. She denies any attempt made by Lucas to understand what is wrong all day until she finally breaks down crying when Lucas talks about escaping and getting out of this place in the game. They cut their quest short for the day, and she is finally willing to attempt to talk about what happened, and what she is feeling to Lucas. Lucas is able to comfort her and make her feel substantially better. It is incredibly powerful to see Leah stare at the Zen garden where Shizuka berated her upon returning to her room. Leah still doesn't want to talk to Sergei this night, so she logs out for the night. The next day, she continues the quest with Lucas, which culminates in them ending up in a model of Lucas's messy room, which Leah finds hilarious. It is a much needed distraction from her current state of mind. Afterwards, Lucas and Leah talk some more, specifically about how he has been worrying about being stuck in the game permanently, which is what Leah is worrying about, although for a different reason. Lucas makes a comment along the lines of whether we are stuck in real life or stuck in the game, what's the difference? This gives Leah some much needed perspective that things are not all bad and helps her to feel much better. The next morning, an orange avatar named Sidwell interrogates Leah, asking her who put her back into the game. After he leaves, Sergei contacts her and tells her to continue to the tower in the area in order to escape. Once in the tower, Leah must complete some puzzles in combat before Sergei breaks the rules of the game by allowing Leah to break through instances of the tower in order to get to the same instance as Lucas. Each instance she breaks through leads to a different room that she must cross, which typically involves a puzzle or some combat. However, the blue avatar intercepts Leah and has some enemies chase her as she continues to jump through instances. This part is amazing, as you do puzzles on the fly while being chased and attacked. It feels so frantic, like you're a badass, even though the puzzles here are really quite simple. Eventually, the blue avatar forces her to fight a giant fire and ice slug named Gastropolis, just before reaching Lucas. The blue avatar has scaled the slug's health to be so ridiculously high. So high, in fact, that Leah can essentially never kill it. So Sergei hacks the game so that by killing the baby slugs it spits out, she scales her attack so she can effectively do damage to it. This feels so absurdly cool, like you are breaking the game and becoming so much stronger. After killing it, Leah breaks through another instance and reaches Lucas. They almost escape, but at the last second Lucas is captured by the blue avatar. The blue avatar tries to force Leah to stay, but Lucas yells at her to leave him behind, and after much hesitation, she does. After escaping, Sergei and Leah finally get to talk, and he explains the reason he lied to her. That Evatars have in the past not handled finding out the nature of their existence well. Thankfully, Leah was able to accept this information without malfunctioning. The reason Sergei put Leah into Crossworlds was that his friends, Satoshi, Shizuka, and Guntham, went missing after Instantainment denied Satoshi the ability to continue developing Evatars, something he was very passionate about. However, a few years later, Sergei found Leah's code within the game's database, which was very strange, and he decided to log her into the game to attempt to find his friends. Sergei also explains that somebody was attempting to track him while they were within Vermilion Wasteland, which is why he minimized contact with Leah. Leah is able to accept everything that has happened, forgive Sergei for lying to her, and agree to work to secure a more permanent solution for Evatars in the future. This gives Leah hope for the first time in a while, and a new goal to work towards. Sergei also mentions the possibility of someone watching Leah in-game, as the way she was able to be abducted. More on that later. At this point, Leah has been gone from the main game of Crossworlds for a week, and when she finally reunites with Emily, well, she isn't very happy. She is furious that Leah, from her point of view, abandoned the raid. Not only that, but she is also mad that her friend has been gone for a week with no word as to why. From Emily's perspective, Leah was still online for this entire week, but she wasn't able to contact Leah, and she was even worried that Leah had blocked her. Unfortunately, Leah is unable to give any details of what happened to Emily because of her speech module malfunctioning, which just makes her even more upset. This is the biggest trouble not being able to speak has gotten Leah into. During this conversation, Lucas shows up, and initially Leah is confused, as she saw him get recaptured, but as he talks it becomes clear that Lucas has no memory of what happened in Vermilion Wasteland, which is heartbreaking. Leah hugs Lucas, which confuses Emily and Lucas even more. Leah then runs off to be alone, and Sergei talks with her. If you haven't guessed already, the Lucas from Vermilion Wasteland, the one she bonded with so much, is an Evotar. This means that he is still trapped with the blue avatar, and the Lucas here knows nothing about what happened to Leah. Leah decides to continue playing through Crossworlds on her own in an attempt to reach Sapphire Ridge, a place she saw in her dreams, in the hopes of recovering more of Shizuka's memories. First, however, she needs to explore Gaia's garden. She sees Apollo and Yorn at the entrance of the area. Both of them are able to see that something isn't quite right with Leah and decide to party up with her to explore the area and keep her company. After exploring the area, Citron contacts Leah and asks to meet up to race one of the upcoming dungeons with her. Turns out, to the surprise of Leah and Emily, he asked both of them to meet up in order to force a reconciliation between the two of them. Citron manages to tease out through yes and no questions that Leah did not want to leave the raid or be unavailable for a week. And holy crap, Leah saying hi over and over while crying and hugging Emily is fucking hilarious. The moment is also very wholesome, and it feels very good to be reunited with Emily for good. Next up, there are 3 back-to-back-to-back full-size dungeons. There are some small main quest sections between them, but they are very short compared to the time required between the other dungeons of the game. Don't get me wrong, the dungeons are great, but the pacing suffers when that is all you are doing. The dungeons in this game are quite difficult, and it can be mentally taxing. The prospect of having to do 3 in a row is quite daunting. As a result, I had to take many more breaks during this section while playing the game, in order to not burn out. The puzzle components used in these dungeons are substantially more complex than in the previous 2 dungeons. These compressors are used in all 3 dungeons and do different things when hit by wave and shock bullets. When hit by wave bullets, it will make a green ball that can be launched through walls and activate teleporters. Shock bullets make a purple ball that goes around walls and activates Tesla coils. Both of these compressed balls will dissipate if they hit the diamonds on the ground. I haven't yet mentioned the best part of the dungeons in this game. Before the boss, each dungeon has a giant puzzle that tests everything you have learned throughout the dungeon. Not only do these puzzles test your understanding of the mechanics of the dungeon, but they also require you to mechanically execute everything quickly in order to complete them. For example, in the 5th dungeon, there is an incredible puzzle to get the Master Key. First, you shoot a charged shot through a slowdown orb. Then you race to the right and shoot a compressor with wave bullets to launch it at an electrical cage. This lowers a wall for the ball and will continue through the triangles following the arrows that have been set up prior. This lowers more walls along the ball's path. Next, after the wave ball passes through this teleport block and hits the final electrical cage, I use a wave ball to teleport this block to the next wave teleport above it by bouncing a charge shot. This makes it so when I shoot a compressed shock ball at the Tesla coil, it will continue traveling around the wall of the teleport block. This triggers another Tesla coil. Then I must bounce another teleport ball to move this block to the other teleport to allow the compressed shock ball to hit the final Tesla coil. Finally, I teleport the block one last time so that the ball can bounce off it and hit the switch, which gives me the key. Truthfully, this puzzle is not absurdly difficult, but it makes you feel very smart for completing it and showcases you understand the function of both compressed shock and wave balls along with teleport blocks. After completing all of the dungeons, Leah can now access Sapphire Ridge, the final area of the game. After completing the main quest of the area, you unlock the ability to visit Rhombus Square, the capital of Crossworlds. The city is absurdly cool. It is mostly made up of glass, which is very aesthetically pleasing and provides some new challenges in the form of an arena game mode. In this mode, you fight waves of enemies and increase your score by killing them quickly and taking less damage. Rhombus Square is also expanded greatly in the DLC. By reenacting some movement from Leah's dreams in Sapphire Ridge, she accesses a secret area within Sapphire Ridge. Here, a confrontation between Leah and Shizuka results in a duel between them. The game has been building to this fight for quite some time, and it feels like an epic showdown between two evenly matched opponents. Regardless of the outcome of the duel, you continue on to meet Satoshi, or rather, an Evotar of Satoshi. He explains how after Instatainment refused to allow him to continue his development of Evotars, he met a man named Sidwell. Sidwell agreed to fund Satoshi Guntham and Shizuka's work and was able to provide them with an area within Crossworlds to conduct their research and development, Vermilion Wasteland. Here, Satoshi managed to create the first Evotar, Leah. Things were going well until Sidwell began asking if it would be possible to extract memories of the original players from Evotars. Because Evotars could be created without the original player's knowledge, this is a great tool for Sidwell to obtain information about any player. At this point, Satoshi, Guntham, and Shizuka realized what was happening and were horrified by what Sidwell was doing. However, he blackmailed them into continuing their work. Satoshi reveals that he was the one who hid Leah's code in Crossworlds, and that he did so with the hope that Sergei would find it and use Leah to help them. He also informs Leah and Sergei that Sidwell has a server that contains all of the Evotars with the exception of Leah. It is located in the tower in Vermilion Wasteland. Sidwell also has the ability to erase all the data from the Evotar server remotely, so it will be very difficult to save the Evotars. Sidwell required that Guntham physically relocate to the playground in order to control him. This is unusual, as everyone simply uses avatars with the exception of maintenance crews like that of the MS Solar. Shizuka explains that Guntham isn't all there mentally anymore, and that he's the blue avatar that had kidnapped Leah. After this conversation, Leah and Shizuka go outside to talk. They sit by a tree in the middle of a pond, and the scene is truly incredibly beautiful. They bond over some of their similarities for a bit, and Shizuka apologizes to Leah for what happened in Vermilion Wasteland, and Leah lets her know it's okay by rubbing her shoulder. This surprises Shizuka because she never gets touchy with people. She is able to appreciate that Leah is not some carbon copy of herself, and begins to think of Leah as her own person. Afterwards, Leah needs to get the assistance of all of her friends that she has made throughout her adventure, with the notable exception of Citron. He says he will not be online for personal reasons for the next few days. This will become important during the DLC. In order to get her friends to understand what she needs from them, she brings them to their meeting room and projects Sergei so he can explain the plan to them. He also informs them that Leah is an Evotar. This is understandably nerve-wracking for Leah, as she is unsure if her friends will accept her with this new information. Thankfully, they do. However, Leah is also still nervous for her future. Instatainment has denied Evotars an official place within Crossworlds before, so even if they are successful in copying all the data from the Evotar server, there is no guarantee of a place for Evotars within this world. By using a hidden entrance in Sapphire Ridge that Satoshi told them about, the group is able to enter Vermilion Wasteland. Here they are able to crash the Evotar server, preventing Sidwell from erasing the data remotely. Then Leah must tackle the tower dungeon alone. After making her way through various puzzles and fights, Leah is able to reach the top of the tower. Before proceeding to meet Guntham, she must do one more amazing and massive puzzle. I'm not going to explain the solution like I did for the 5th dungeon, but just watch it. After completing the puzzle, Leah meets Guntham in his avatar form and must defeat him in order to save the Evotar server. This fight has two very distinct phases. The first is versus the blue avatar and is nearly identical to the fight when he kidnapped Leah. He uses a variety of elemental attacks and slowly destroys the arena as the fight progresses. I really like the swinging balls attack. It feels very fun to dodge. Breaking a couple of balls to make a path and dashing from one safe area to the other is cool. Other than that, I don't have much to say about Phase 1. Phase 2 thankfully grants a checkpoint, because Phase 1 alone took me 15 minutes. Phase 2 has an incredible atmosphere. Slowly gliding down to this marble platform with golden clouds and a beautiful blue sky in the background with perfect music playing, it feels epic as hell. I really dig the design of Phase 2. A giant armored boss with tusks and a trunk and one eye, I really dig it. He also has so many interesting attacks, between simple punches to projectiles that come out with this super satisfying snap sound. By hitting his fist after a punch, you can break him, briefly stopping his attacks and making his trunk break faster. After breaking his trunk, you get to walk up it and hit him in the face. This is how you actually do damage to the boss. Most of the time, each time you break the trunk, you get one notch of his health bar down. However, if you happen to do just a tiny bit too little damage during the break, you just add an entire another cycle of breaking fists, breaking the trunk, hitting the face. This is because after lowering him a notch, you get kicked off the face. This feels tremendously punishing for just barely missing the health threshold of the notch. In my opinion, the most tragic misstep this fight takes is in reusing the health and attack damage buffing from the Gastropolis fight when escaping from the blue avatar. It was a super interesting and unique mechanic to that fight that I loved. However, reusing it made it feel much less special. In a way, I understand why it was included, because from Guntham's perspective, it makes it more difficult to kill, so if he was really trying to win, of course he would do it both times. However, from a gameplay perspective, I don't like it. The other narrative problem this introduces is why does Guntham only buff health? If he wanted to, he could buff attack, considering that is what Leah and Sergei do. In fact, he could do it to the point where every hit one-shots Leah, as he did to capture Leah to bring her to Vermilion Wasteland. Obviously that would be stupid, but if he was really trying to win at all costs, he would obviously do that. You could somewhat excuse it as Guntham is a game designer and he wants to create, quote-unquote, the ultimate experience, but I don't buy that as a reason he would let himself lose. One solution would have been to only have this mechanic on the final boss and not the first time, and maybe have a line about him discovering the ability to do this. Then maybe I could justify it as him not having thought of buffing attack, even though it still seems obvious to me, and Sergei was able to figure out how to do it mid-fight, so Guntham could too. Once the health starts getting buffed after every notch, the fight turns into a slog. The first part of Phase 2 goes relatively quickly, but this makes the fight take so much longer. It also introduces some really stupid strategy if you want to play optimally. Because you effectively can't deal damage until Leah's attack multiplier reaches the health multiplier, it only hurts you to break the trunk, because then you'll have to do it all over again once you have enough attack to do damage. So what you end up doing is hitting him until the trunk is about to break, and then waiting until you have enough orbs to get the attack multiplier required to damage him. One thing I do like about the fight is the use of puzzles. Every once in a while it will give you a small puzzle using the puzzle components from the dungeon, and if you do the puzzle in time, it will give you several orbs, making it take much less time to get the attack necessary to continue. The other problem I have with the fight is it feels too long. Phase 2 took me 18 minutes, so combined this fight was over half an hour. After beating the boss, Guntham is revealed to also be physically located at the top of the tower. He congratulates Leah and opens the path to the Evotar server before jumping off the tower and killing himself. There are two possible endings to the base game. The trigger for the good ending over the bad ending is having a conversation with Ivan, a shareholder of Instantainment, and friend of Albert, who is a member of the First Scholars Guild. With Sergei's help, Leah is able to get a meeting with Ivan through this connection. During their meeting, Ivan gives Leah many tests to see how she reacts, some to test her intelligence and some to ensure that she is in fact an AI. Assuming you pass Ivan's test, after the Evotar server is saved, Instantainment will agree to begin a research project for Evotars within Crossworlds. If you never have this meeting with Ivan, then the project will be denied when Sergei proposes it, and Leah and the Evotars will not be allowed to play Crossworlds anymore. You cannot begin the New Home DLC until you've gotten the good ending. The research project takes form in a new area called Homestead, a small private town for a limited number of Evotars to live in during this testing period. This is where the New Home DLC begins. Here, Leah reunites with her friends after several months of being offline while Sergei was negotiating on the behalf of Evotars Instantainment. After bringing Leah online, Sergei also brings the Evotar of Lucas online, who from this point renames himself Luke for simplicity's sake, along with getting a new look. Leah is also shown her new home in Homestead. Now that Leah is back, the First Scholars decide it is finally time to retry the raid that was interrupted the last time. Luke also agrees to take Citron's place as he is still mysteriously absent. The raid goes well. However, Luke is struggling with his new knowledge about his existence and makes several comments about it that bring the group's mood down. After the raid, he opens up about what's going on in his head. For him, being captured and watching Leah escape just happened. He isn't quite ready to go have fun with friends. He misses the real world, his job, even his tiny apartment. Not to mention the fact that he just learned he isn't human and is grappling with the implications of that. When Leah arrives back at Homestead, Emily mentions that Citron never got back online Crossworlds, and at some point, his account disappeared entirely. Sergei hears this and wants to talk with Leah about it. He meets her at her house and tells her that he determined that Citron must have been the one spying on Leah and reporting to Sidwell. Prior to Citron logging out for the last time, before the raid on Vermilion Wasteland, Sergei confronted him and told him that he knew he had been spying on them. He didn't try to deny it, instead he made a deal with Sergei to stop spying on them, and in return, Sergei wouldn't tell Leah about him being a spy. Sergei also reveals his reason for telling Leah now. Within the Evotar server they recovered is an Evotar of Citron. Sergei and Leah bring the Evotar of Citron online. However, when he wakes up, he has no memories at all. Leah agrees to take him around Crossworlds to places they visited together in an attempt to recover his memories. During this conversation, I was already thinking of locations in Crossworlds where something of significance happened to Citron and Leah to bring him to. Unfortunately, the game is a little handholdy here and doesn't even let you go anywhere before telling you directly where you need to go, which is a little annoying. After visiting a few locations, he begins to remember some things, mainly that he was a spy for Sidwell and that he is an Evotar. Sergei also admits that he was so willing to bring Citron back in the hopes that he would remember some information that could lead them to Sidwell, as he never met Justice. The next morning, Apollo and Yorn return from a vacation they've been on since before Leah's return. Apollo informs Leah that a new area, Azure Archipelago, has just become available, and challenges her to a duel for after they finish exploring the area. Apollo also lets Leah know that the final dungeon of Crossworlds will be opening soon. Leah gains the ability to fully explore Rhombus Square here. The city has been greatly expanded in the DLC and has some interesting new side quests to boot. One of the best side quests here is one where you help these players track down their friend across the map. After locating him, you get the opportunity to duel Lily, one of the quest givers. She's a member of the Hexacast class, so the duel feels much different from the previous duels against both Apollo and Shizuka. Azure Archipelago is a very strange area of the game. There are effectively no quests within the area, and the area is fairly small and linear, making it feel unfinished when compared to the areas of the base game. During one of Leah's flashbacks, she realizes that both Sidwell and Citron can do this very peculiar hand movement and makes the connection that Citron is an Evotar of Sidwell. She attempts to communicate that she knows this to Citron, and gets increasingly frustrated as Citron doesn't grasp what she is trying to communicate, or more accurately, is pretending to not understand. Thankfully, Sergei comes to help more directly communicate what Leah is saying, forcing Citron to own up to his identity. The game does a great job here of creeping the player out purely through Citron's facial expressions and music. It really is very unsettling to realize his identity. When Citron starts saying that the only reason they won't delete him is in the hopes that he'll provide them with information about Sidwell, Leah begins crying and gives a big hug to Citron. It's almost as if she regrets even bringing up the subject and wishes she stayed quiet. Despite this newfound knowledge, Leah still cares for Citron and refuses to believe their entire friendship was purely about Citron spying on her. The next day, the final dungeon of Crossworlds releases, and Leah and all her friends agree to run it at the same time. Even Citron agrees in order to take his mind off things. Leah also convinces him to wait to tell everyone about his identity until a later time. One of the strangest problems of the DLC lies in how it handles gear and the level of enemies throughout it. For starters, the level of the final boss in the base game is 60. Azure Archipelago has you fighting enemies around 65. This is a bit of a jump, but it's manageable. However, the recommended level for the dungeon is 70. Because the enemies are comparatively low level even in the highest level area available to you, the enemies give very little experience when grinding from 65 to 70. This is only really a problem because of the lack of quests in this area. Other areas had similar level jumps, but because of the quests, it was easy to get enough XP to get to the necessary levels. This is not the case in Azure Archipelago, so the only option is to grind enemies for a pittance of experience. This is made even worse by the level scaling gear in the DLC. Normally your gear level and Leah's level are separate, and the gear level is more important for combat, so you could get away with being a little bit of a lower level as long as you kept up your gear level. However, all the gear in the DLC scales with your level, meaning if Leah the character is underleveled, your gear will be too. This makes grinding to level 70 almost required. The trader gear in the DLC is also ridiculously difficult to get. Just to get a helmet I wanted, I would have had to grind for rare plants and items in several areas in order to unlock a harder mode for those areas. Then I would grind those enemies for many items. I'd also need to grind enemies and plants in Azure Archipelago. Finally, I would need to grind plants within this dungeon to finally have all the pieces I needed for just the helmet. To be clear, it would have taken me several hours to obtain the resources to get this gear. I just decided it wasn't worth my time and used the standard shop gear so I could have something at my level. This is a shame because the bonuses on gear are more interesting, but when they take so much extra effort to obtain, it's just not worth it. This whole situation reaffirmed my belief that gear and levels are too important for combat. It hardly matters how good you are at the combat, if you are underleveled, the gear and boss fights will become a slog. The final dungeon is the best in the game hands down. It really isn't close. The creativity of what can be done with Pharaoh Balls is insane. They interact with every element you have, and every puzzle element from every dungeon in the game. This makes for some very complex and satisfying puzzles. On top of that, this dungeon is structured slightly differently to other dungeons. This dungeon has many outdoor portions with gameplay more typical to that of exploring an area. There are many secret items to find, platforming puzzles, and conversations to have with characters running throughout the dungeon. This vastly improves the pacing of the dungeon compared to its predecessors. It is especially vital that the pacing is improved so much because the dungeon is absolutely massive. even when compared to the already huge dungeons of the base game. If not for the outdoor sections, this dungeon would have been way too long and mentally taxing. The final Pharaoh puzzle in the dungeon is fantastic. To show how great it is, I need to explain a few mechanics of Pharaoh balls. Firstly, by hitting red switches connected to Pharaoh ball shaped holes in the ground, the Pharaoh ball is teleported there. Secondly, when a Pharaoh ball touches a yellow projection of a Pharaoh ball, it triggers a switch. And when a compressed wave hits a Pharaoh ball, it brings the ball with the compressed wave, triggering any yellow projections in the process. This puzzle involves using the compressed wave balls to bring the Pharaoh ball to all the yellow projections in the room in order to make a path for the charge shot to hit all the triangles in the room and hit the switch. So to start, you fire a charge shot at the slowdown orb, then you fire wave balls at the compressor to launch the Pharaoh ball in front of it through the arranged triangles in the box center area, hitting the first yellow projections, which lowers a wall for the charge shot. The compressed ball hits a diamond on the other side, stopping it and drops the Pharaoh ball there. Then you shoot the Pharaoh ball over to the next yellow projection. This brings up another compressor that you can use to shoot the Pharaoh ball through another yellow projection. However, this causes the Pharaoh ball to be stuck in the box in center, so you hit the red switch to teleport the Pharaoh ball back there. Then you move the Pharaoh ball to another yellow projection, which brings up another compressor. Next, you shoot the compressed ball at the Pharaoh ball, triggering yet another yellow projection, which lowers another wall for the charge shot. Finally, you move the Pharaoh ball over to the starting yellow projection to bring up the first compressor. You compare the compressed wave ball and move the Pharaoh ball to the center of the wall. Then go back behind the compressed ball and shoot it straight at the center of the wall, which drags the Pharaoh ball into the center, hitting the final yellow projection, lowering the last wall for the charge shot to go through so it can finally hit the switch. I want to stress what I said previously. The Pharaoh ball interacts with every single puzzle component and elemental attack the game has introduced, just as it interacts with the compressed wave balls in this puzzle. I could easily show you interesting puzzles for every puzzle component the Pharaoh ball interacts with in this dungeon, but we would be here all day if I did that. One small criticism of the dungeon is how many times it has you fighting the Guardian statues. They are slightly mixed up via their elemental variants, but that does not make up for fighting a total of 11 of them. To be fair, they are very fun enemies to fight, it was just a few too many of them for my taste. The final boss of the dungeon, Duboris, is good, but it has several problems. The biggest being its length. I was slightly underleveled and the boss took me 25 minutes to kill, and when the last half of the fight gets so much more difficult, that is just cruel. The fight has you fighting 4 elemental gods, starting off fighting them 2 at a time. These gods are incredibly cool, each having their own unique attacks. By hitting them with the element they are weak to, you build up their break meter. Once broken, they are pretty easy to kill in that one cycle. After killing one, you can then hit Duboris for a short time, while it revives the next god to fight alongside the one left. This is where you can build up the boss's break meter. However, Duboris is weak to only one element at a time, which is where one of my problems with the fight comes in. There's really no time to use neutral attacks in this fight. Every part of the fight requires you to use elemental attacks, which means your elemental overload will build up very quickly. This feels horrible because if you are an elemental overload or close to it when you break Duboris, you'll do much less damage than you could otherwise, making the fight take so much longer, because it takes so long to get through a cycle. It often took me several cycles to break Duboris a single time. Once broken, I typically did about an eighth of the boss's total health per break. Once getting the boss below 75% health, a simple Pharaoh puzzle appears. Completing the puzzle quick enough makes the next barrage of attacks easier to dodge. During this phase, the gods will gain additional moves. After getting the boss to 50% health, you trigger another simple Pharaoh puzzle that will weaken the next barrage of attacks if completed in time. From this point onward, you'll have to face 4 elemental gods simultaneously, and in addition, you must kill 2 gods before getting the opportunity to hit Duboris. This feels ridiculous, as not only do you need to do double the damage to progress to the main boss, but it also takes much longer to do that damage, as you must find an opening with 4 gods attacking you instead of just 2. I think it would have been much better if you began fighting 4 bosses in this phase, and upon reaching 25% health made it so that you must kill 2 gods to continue. Instead, upon hitting 25% health, there is a more complex Pharaoh puzzle, and the same stakes as the previous 2, except the normal barrage of attacks there is a unique attack. The arena turns black and white and some super cool attacks must be dodged. Upon defeating the boss, you hit a Pharaoh ball into this ice ball, creating this giant spinning Pharaoh ball that looks very epic. It is also revealed that Instantainment is planning to release Crossworlds New Horizons, but it is still in development. Lee meets up with all of her friends at the end of the dungeon to talk about it. However, Citron isn't there, and Emily notices that he is already back in Homestead and presumably didn't finish the dungeon. Emily and Leah go to visit him to see if he is okay. Citron has obviously been struggling with his identity and also remembered some troubling information. Firstly, that in order to efficiently extract information from the Evotars, Sidwell and his team needed to show the Evotars that they were creating places and people from their memories. In order to know what to show them, he needed someone to spy on them before creating the Evotars of them. So Sidwell created an Evotar of himself to spy on those players for him. That Evotar was Citron. Citron was spying on about 20 players at once, playing on multiple avatars to reduce suspicion. Secondly, he recalls another person helping him in Sidwell, but when he tries to remember anything about them, he panics and his mind goes blank. He believes that by going to Vermilion Wasteland he may be able to recover his memory of this person. Leah, Emily, and Citron convince Sergei to take them back to Vermilion Wasteland one last time. Citron leads them to several places he remembers here, before eventually finding a room with Sidwell inside, along with what appears to be stasis tubes for Evotars he was using to spy on other players. Sidwell begins attacking them, however partway through the fight, Sergei tells them that this is not in fact Sidwell, just an enemy made by Guntham with Sidwell's appearance. I don't have much to say about this boss fight, other than that it is the third fight in the game that has the buffed health of the boss, so Sergei must buff Leah's attack to beat it. I've already said why I dislike it during this section about the final boss of the base game, so I won't repeat myself here. I'll just say it is made even worse by using this mechanic a third time. I do really like how this is one of the few major bosses in the game that you fight as a party. This fight is also about 500 times easier than the boss fight in the DLC dungeon, which feels a little strange. Anyway, after defeating this fake Sidwell, Citron regains much more of his memory. It turns out when he was spying on other players, he did not know he was an Evotar at first. This is because he had a recording of what he thought was himself, Sidwell, informing him that he was using a special connection to stay in the game for prolonged sessions, and that his memory would be incoherent because of it. After several weeks of spying on players, as some of his memories returned, he realized that he must be an Evotar. He also remembered that he was in a cycle. Sidwell would create Evotars himself, show them the video telling them about the prolonged sessions to use them as spies, and when they realized the nature of their existence, he would interrogate them and delete them from existence. Citron was also deleted. After Leah escaped Vermilion Wasteland, Citron realized that he may have an opportunity to escape himself, as he knew Leah and her friends would try to rescue the Evotars there. However, the Evotars Sidwell was using as spies were not on the main Evotar server that Leah saved. They were on a private server, so Citron made an Evotar of himself, an Evotar of an Evotar, and put it on the main Evotar server. This obviously has a bit of a plot hole, in that if Citron made an Evotar of himself before he was deleted, how does the Evotar of himself have the memories of being interrogated and deleted? It is made clear via Leah and Shizuka and Lucas and Luke that the Evotar version doesn't get any of the original person's memories after this split, so this doesn't really make sense. When they return to Homestead, Citron explains his identity and situation to the other Evotars living there and promises to tell them everything he knows about Sidwell in the hopes of catching him. He also asks them to decide if he should be allowed to live in Homestead with them, given this new information. Shizuka believes that Citron should be held accountable for the actions of his past selves while Luke and Emily completely disagree. They argue the original Citron was forced to do Sidwell's bidding. Ultimately, it is up to the player to decide whether they believe Citron should be deleted or allowed to stay in the village. And regardless of your decision, Citron will help to try locate Sidwell and bring him to justice. I decide to allow him to stay, as it seems wrong to punish this version of Citron when he did literally nothing wrong. He was just created and has to deal with the guilt of both of his past selves, and it is evident from the differences between both Luke and Lucas and Leah and Shizuka that Evotars have their own personalities unique from their original person. To me, it doesn't make much sense to punish him. Shizuka gets very mad at this decision and logs out. It's incredibly impressive how far the concept of Evotars is taken. We go from having no idea of Evotars' existence, to two of the main characters being Evotars in Leah and Citron, then to Citron being an Evotar of Sidwell, and finally, grappling with how accountable Evotars should be for their past selves' actions. After the decision, Evotars are given jobs around Crossworlds. Luke is given a job as a tour guide for new players. Leah is given a new way of communicating by Sergei that allows her to say whatever words she wants from now on. Instatainment even gives Evotars the ability to taste food within the game. In a conversation between Luke and Sergei, it is revealed that Instatainment won't allow them to bring the Evotars that were rescued in Vermilion Wasteland into the game, as they believe it would be bad PR for them. But Luke and Sergei will try to convince them. Thanks to Citron's help, Sergei is able to locate Sidwell and bring him to justice. And finally, Leah and Shizuka have been given jobs as playtesters, and they compete to see who can defeat the most enemies as the credits roll. After the credits, there's a scene of all the friends Leah made along the way having a barbecue in Homestead. Crosscode is genuinely one of the greatest games I've ever played. I know it may not have come across that way for all the criticism I laid onto it throughout this video, but it's true. It is so incredibly impressive how high quality all the major parts of this game are. Snappy combat, mind-bending puzzles, and a fabulous setting and exploration. It even has great characters and a compelling narrative. It is so plainly clear to me how much time, energy, and passion was put into this game by Radical Fish Games, and it breaks my heart a little bit that Crosscode isn't more successful than it is. Not only for Radical Fish Games, because goddamn they deserve more success, but also for all the gamers I know would love this game if they only knew it existed. Here's a few small things I couldn't fit into the script. The soundtrack is superb. Some of the battle themes get a little tiring because you hear them so often, but not overly so, and there were so many story moments that were heightened by the music. The title screen is so relaxing. I love the music when you launch the game, just seeing Leah standing there in front of Rhombus Square, it's fantastic. The sound of the button presses in the menus are really satisfying. There is a ranking system in combat that builds up the more enemies you kill without stopping, and rewards you with more valuable materials. However, it is rarely necessary to engage with this system. I think it would have been more beneficial if alongside for better item drops, enemies gave more experience points in higher rank combats. This would have given more of a reason to engage with the system. It would be super convenient if you could click on an item in the trader log to see where to acquire it if you have the knowledge in the monster log or botanics log. Instead, you have to look through the entirety of either log until you find the source of the item, which takes forever. It's super cool that the game includes accessibility options for enemy damage, the rate of enemy attacks, and the speed required to complete puzzles. It makes the game much friendlier to players of different skill levels.